Hello, everybody. Welcome to Calls. This is the 2023 Wells Fargo Initial Research Show. It is good to be back. As you can see, I've got plenty of sun on vacation this past week in Tennessee. It was a good time. It was good to unplug, get away with a lot of good friends, good people, good times had by all. And it was a successful week for yours truly. I had two top 20s that came in. Did not have the winner in Tony Finau. The only win wager I put up was Nikolai Højgaard. He was pretty middling, all things being honest and fair. So DFS wasn't a major success. I had some very, very good suggestions for you. Carson Young, which was one of the top 20s that I had placed a wager on. He played very, very well. Was very, very high on, like I said, Højgaard, John Rahm, Tony Finau. Trying to think of a few other, Brandon Wu, Dylan Wu. So lots of good suggestions, a few bad ones. If I'm going to be honest and critique myself, I was very high on Aaron Rai. He misses the cut. I was very high on Højgaard. He was pretty middling. And I suggested that I was going to pretty much full fade Will Gordon. I much preferred Joseph Bramlett in that area of the price board, and Will Gordon goes out and plays extremely well. I like Will Gordon. I didn't like the ownership. So a lot of good, little bad, but it was a successful week for yours truly, especially in terms of the outright wagers. And if you had success this past week for the Mexico Open, please jump into chat or get a hold of me on social media. Would love to be able to shout out members of the community who have success. Would love to be able to do that, especially tomorrow night as I returned home yesterday or late last evening. Have been resting and catching up on a lot of things, but we are moving forward to the next designated event on the PGA Tour. We are going to Quail Hollow and the Wells Fargo Championship. So let's get into it. All statistics provided tonight and every night are from fantasynational.com. It is the best tool out there for your money. It's going to make you a much smarter gambler and a much better DFS player. Go check them out. It is simply well worth your investment. In the description to the video, there are links to all of my social media. This is Twitter and Instagram, where I will be posting research tomorrow around the Wells Fargo and specifically around Quail Hollow. The Wells Fargo Championship has been a continuous event on the PGA Tour, but it has not always been played at Quail Hollow, especially recently. Last year, Max Homa, your technical defending champion, but it was not played at Quail Hollow as Quail Hollow was getting prepped for the President's Cup. So I will have some good research notes for you all over on Twitter and Instagram tomorrow to make sure you focus on what you need to for Quail Hollow. So if you want to see the research that I do, give me a follow over those two places. As I mentioned, I hit a couple of top 20s this past week at the Mexico Open. So if you would like to see my betting cards every week for the PGA Tour, give me a follow over at Twitter. I post that every Wednesday evening after the DFS Tactics show. So if you would like to see that, give me a follow over there. And then the link to my Twitch channel is also in the description. This is where I do all of my in-depth research. It's much more laid back. I have music going in the background, but if you would like to see my process and how I go about things, want direct access to ask any questions while I am in the middle of the research, if you're interested in that, give me a follow over there. And before I forget, baseball will be starting back up starting tomorrow. That will be over on Twitter. My daily 3 up, 3 down will return tomorrow for the Monday slate for baseball. I took the last half of last week off as I was on vacation. But baseball will return. That is over on Twitter as well. And then lastly for this intro, we are live. Chat is open. Again, want to hear from you all. How was your Mexico Open? Hopefully you shared in the success that I had. What are you looking forward to in terms of the Wells Fargo? Who are your early leans in terms of players that you might want to wager or players that you might be focusing on in DFS? What kind of players do you think excel here at Wells Fargo? All that good stuff. So jump into chat. Would love to hear from you all out there in the community. So let's do our initial research for the 2023 Wells Fargo Championship. And we're going to start as we always do on a Sunday evening over at the GCSAA Tournament Fact Sheet. And just getting it out of the way very, very quickly, feel free to jump into the comments or into chat live, make fun of the obvious two-tone colorization of my face that you want. You can tell that I was wearing a hat a lot of the past week or last half of last week as I was on the golf course a lot. But over here at the GCSA Tournament Fact Sheet, we are in Charlotte, North Carolina at Quail Hollow Club. Quail Hollow is a very, very long course. You see here 7,538 yards as a par 71. An extremely long course. So back-to-back long courses here on the PGA Tour. So we're going to be looking at a lot of long course metrics this week, or using that long course filter over on Fantasy National. You see the Stimp listed at 12. That is generally fast. That is very consistent with the speed ratings that Fantasy National gives greens here at Quail Hollow. They are generally listed as fast. Quail Hollow is originally a George Cobb design. It was most recently renovated by Tom Fazio in 2016. He also did some renovations in 1997. So this is a Tom Fazio redesign, but the original architect is George Cobb. So nothing to do with the architect filter in Fantasy National. But in terms of some specifics around Quail Hollow, the greens are actually fairly large. A little over 6,500 square feet, which would put it slightly above average on the PGA Tour. Only 26 acres of fairway. These fairways are difficult to hit. The course is in general very, very difficult, as we will see throughout this evening and throughout the week. Lots of rough on the course. Four water hazards, but 7 holes with water in play. The interesting note here, at least in my opinion, these greens have always been labeled Bermuda, but they are Poa Trivialis Overseed. And I believe this is one of the first years that this has been labeled as a Poa Trivialis Overseed. However, it is my understanding that the Bermuda is still dominant. So as the week progresses, we will see if we can gather some more information on whether we need to look at Poa Trivialis Overseed or if we're just going to be looking at Bermuda. As of right now, I'm going to be going with Bermuda. Just putting that out there. And if I find that the Poa Trivialis is more, or if the Bermuda is dormant, I should say, then we'll switch to Poa Trivialis. But all base grass around Quail Hollow is Bermuda. You've got rye overseed in the rough, rye overseed in the fairways. And as I mentioned, the Quail Hollow hosted the President's Cup. So this tournament, the Wells Fargo, was not played at Quail Hollow last year. So it'll be important to remember that as we move forward tonight and through the week, that the 2022 Wells Fargo is not going to be a direct comparison as it was at a different course. But that is a look at Quail Hollow from a GCSAA Tournament Fact Sheet. Again, some major notes here, a very, very long par 71 at 7,538 yards. Generally fast greens, not typically lightning, although they have played lightning one year in particular. They're just generally fast. Slightly larger than average green sizes. Not a lot of fairway. 7 holes with water in play. Bermuda is the base grass throughout the course. We are seeing Poa Trivialis overseed on the greens. So we'll see, or we'll try to gather throughout the week whether we're going to be looking at Bermuda or Poa Trivialis. As of right now, I'm looking at Bermuda for putting. So there's a look at Quail Hollow. We are going to move to Fantasy National, and we're not going to spend too much time here on the player page. Instead, let's go straight to the course breakdown in Fantasy National. The first thing I like to do in terms of looking at the scorecard for a course is to find the 9th and 10th most difficult holes. Try to figure out where par is. If par falls, somewhere around the 9th and 10th most difficult holes, then the course will play directly on average. Well, you see the 10th most difficult hole still playing over par. Even the 13th most difficult is still over par. The 14th, so you see in between the 13th and 14th most difficult holes is where par is falling. That would indicate that it is a difficult course, difficult tournament, and that is indeed the case. As you see, the very, very difficult finishing stretch that is at Quail Hollow, the par 4 16th, playing to 2/10 of a shot over par, a quarter of a shot over par, 3/10 of a shot over par, almost a third of a shot over par, another quarter of a shot over par, 2/10. You just got a lot of holes where bogeys come into play. You've got the very, very difficult par 3 17th, has an 8.5% double bogey rate. I made the comment last week at Vedanta that the very difficult 17th, I actually think it was a very, very difficult hole, played about 4/10 over par, had a double bogey rate at 8.5%. That's some of the highest on the PGA Tour. There are scoreable holes here at Quail Hollow. Certainly the par 5 15th plays to nearly a half a shot under par, 3/10 under par, a quarter of a shot, 2/10. But you go quickly from, in between 1 and 2/10 under par to over par. Very, very, very quickly. You do have one decent eagle rate, the par 5 7th. 3% eagle rate, not astronomical, but a decent eagle rate. A few good birdie chances, 45% here, a little over 33% here. So there are some good scoreable holes at Quail Hollow, but for the most part, it is a difficult test of golf. And you will see that the length of the golf course comes in a lot of these par 4s, and there is one par 3 that is extremely long, 249 yards. But some of these par 4s, 495, 483, 505, 506, 494, just a handful of very, very long, difficult par 4s here at Quail Hollow. So there's a look at the scorecard, and in terms of length and difficulty and where some of the scoreable chances are around Quail Hollow. We move to strokes gained by shot type for your top 10 around Quail Hollow. You can see it is a ball striking course. Now, if you're making putts, you're generally going to be rising on any leaderboard, but you can see the heavy emphasis of off the tee versus around the green. Almost a quarter of a shot for around the green whereas you have almost 3/4 of a shot for off the tee. We move to the top fives. You see, it's roughly the same. The off the tee distances itself from around the green even more. The only reason the ball striking is not pulling away from the short game is the fact of the putting. The approach, just over one per round. And then for your winners, look at all the putting. Look at all of the putting. It is such a major factor here around Quail Hollow. But even, strokes gained approach, 0.8, off the tee, 0.6. Around the green does rise a little bit for your winners, but very consistently is a ball striking course for your top fives, top tens, even in your top 20s. The approach actually outweighs the putting. It's just when you're winning the tournament, you're draining a lot of putts. So a ball striking course, again, heavy emphasis in off the tee, but we're going to be looking at some putting metrics here and see if we can discern who might be some players to target, especially in the Microsoft Excel portion, who some players might be to target who have had a lot of success on the greens here at Quail Hollow. Moving to average strokes gained by hole by par, you see the par fives. There are 3 of them, as this is a par 71. So even though Vedanta last week in Mexico was a par 71, you still had your full allotment of par 5s. You had 4 of them. You just had 5 par 3s. This is more of a traditional, or what you would consider, or what I would consider a traditional par 71, in which you have 4 par 3s and 3 par 5s. 1 par 5 there, par 5 10th, and the par 5 7th, versus par 3s, the 4th, the 6th, the 13th, and the 17th. So anyway, for the top 10, par 5s far outweighing all of the others. Par 4s, very, very important as well. And then the par 3s quite lagging behind, which is a little shocking, at least for me. But there it is. Top 5s, the par 5s still the most important, although the par 4s are really gaining in importance on the par 5s. The par 3s still lagging behind. And then for your winners, all in the par 5s. So we'll see as we move to Microsoft Excel later in the show if the par 3s really truly are as mitigated in importance as they seem here. But another course and another tournament that looks like you have to be able to score on your par 5s, as those are your really only good chances. You do have your par 4 14th, short par 4 344. That's a pretty easy hole. But again, your par 5 15th, the easiest hole. Par 5 10th, third easiest hole. Par 5 7th, par 5 10th, fourth easiest hole. Par 5 7th, third easiest hole. And then you quickly get to holes that play over par. So you got to take advantage of the par 5s here around Quail Hollow. Let me reset this to the top 10s, just in case we want to take a look at this a little later. Moving to hole composition, and this will really, really emphasize the length of the course and the types of holes that we're going to have a lot of focus on this week. As hole composition around Quail Hollow, you have a short par 3, medium, or shorter, long, and very long par 3. So nothing, at least in terms of graphically, that a certain length will be the most important. You do have 2 very short par 4s, both in the 340 range. One that measures from 400 to 450. So it's odd to see that there are no 350 to 4 par 4s around Quail Hollow, but the majority of your holes, 6 of the 11 par 4s here at Quail Hollow measure from 450 to 5. So we will see if that leads to upper echelon success in terms of the players who play well here at Quail Hollow. You have two very long par 4s that are over 500 yards. You have one par 5 from 500 to 550, two par 5s that measure from 550 to 6. Approach shot distribution. No real surprise here with the length of the course. Majority of approach shots, more than 30% of them, come from 200 plus. In fact, it's pretty close to a step ladder here. 200 plus being the most, then 175 to 200, 150 to 175, and so on and so forth. So again, we will see if 200 plus proximity is a leading factor in terms of leaderboard success throughout the week. But early on in your research, certainly look for players who are good from 200 plus. Historic cut line here at Quail Hollow. Again, no data from last year for Quail Hollow, as Quail Hollow was getting prepared for the President's Cup, but in 2021, plus line was +3, or cut line, was +3. It was +2 in 2019, +4. So a difficult tournament, just a very, very difficult tournament, usually in the +3 to +4 range. If you were to move further back in the timeline. Scoring distribution, this tells you everything you need to know about the difficulty of Quail Hollow too. In many different ways you will see that Quail Hollow is very difficult, but this is another way to look at it. 17% birdies versus 18.8, almost 19% bogeys. The doubles bar is visible and the eagles bar is not. So stacking the doubles on top of the bogeys, eagles on top of the birdies, there are more scores that are over par than under par, making this difficult. Driving accuracy, we saw this a little bit in the GCSA tournament fact sheet. Not a lot of fairway, so driving accuracy only 54% here at Quail Hollow versus 62% at the average tour event. Green regulation percentage, even though these greens are large, this course is long and it is difficult. So greens here also significantly lower than the average tour event, 61.5 or so percent here versus 65, almost 66% the average tour event. And players are much less successful scrambling here than at the average tour event. 3 putts per round, higher. So by every conceivable metric, it's just showing the difficulty of Quail Hollow. Driving accuracy, greens, scrambling, 3 putts, scoring distribution. I mean, even hole composition, it's not a great way to think about difficulty, of course, but even in terms of hole composition, you have 6 par 4s from 450 to 5. Generally, the longer holes are, the more difficult they are. Average driving distance, players know they just have to have some length here. Even if they miss the fairway, they just have to have some length here. So right at 300 yards is the average distance here at Quail Hollow versus about 282, I believe it is, for the average tour event. Let's see. So, yeah, 299.9 and then 283. So average driving distance is longer here. Players have to hit driver on a lot of these par 4s to have success around Quail Hollow. And then lastly, green and regulation proximity, 36 feet here at Quail Hollow versus 29 at the average tour event. So proximity much further away than the average tour event. So by every conceivable metric, we are looking at a very, very difficult golf course. All right, so let's go ahead and move back to the player page at Fantasy National and the players that are in the field this week. for the Quail Hollow, or for the Wells Fargo at Quail Hollow. A few names that I know that aren't in. John Rahm has decided to skip this event. Hideki is not going to be playing this week. He has cited an injury. And there's one other prominent name, and it's escaping me right now. But there were 3 pretty big names that I know are not playing this week. But other than those 3, the cream of the crop on the PGA Tour are here. It is a designated event. So Xander and Colin Morikawa, Rory, Jordan Spieth, Matt Fitzpatrick, Sungjae, Victor Hovland. I mean, the who's who, Justin Thomas. Everybody other than John Rahm, Hideki, and one other, which is escaping me, is here this week. You see, I have the timeline stretched back to 2021. It's because I have went ahead and filtered on long courses. Hey, good evening, Bruce. Thanks for jumping in chat. Scotty, thank you. Yes, Scotty Scheffler is the third one, I believe, who is not here. So thank you, Bruce, for jumping into chat and giving me that information as it escaped me. So those 3 are the 3 that I know of that have decided to skip this event. But you see that I have went ahead and filtered to long courses going back to 2021. We saw in the GCSA tournament fact sheet that this is just simply going to be a very, very long, very difficult course. It always is. So, since the beginning of 2021, your top performers on long courses, which by Fantasy National's definition, a long course is over 7,400 yards. Those top performers have been Xander Schauffele, Colin Morikawa, Corey Connors, Rory, Sam Stevens, Jordan Spieth, Chris Kirk, Sungjae, Matt Fitzpatrick, and Keegan Bradley. Coinciding with length, we are absolutely going to be looking at some difficult, at least difficult relative to par metrics. So in rounds that are difficult, as soon as my mouse decides to cooperate, in rounds that are difficult, in the same time frame since the start of 2021, your top performers have been Colin Morikawa, Rory, Jordan Spieth, Matt Fitzpatrick, Victor Hovland, Xander, Sungjae, Justin Thomas, Shane Lowry, and Max Homa. So quite a bit of overlap here. Probably no surprise. Most major championships are long and difficult, especially difficult. So you have Colin Morikawa, who is top 10 in both long and difficult. Rory, top 10 in both. Jordan Spieth, Matt Fitzpatrick. Xander was number 1, I believe, on long courses. 6th in difficult. So a lot of overlap here. You do get a few different names in certain situations, but for the most part, think about your major championship style golfers, and those are the ones that generally play the best around Quail Hollow. Again, as I was mentioning throughout the GCSA tournament fact sheet, I am going to be looking at Bermuda, although I will be very keen on trying to gather the information and seeing if we are able to determine if the Poa Trivialis is dominant right now, or if the Bermuda has grown. But as of right now, I'm going to be using Bermuda. So, and actually, I'm going to go ahead and just give you all the information that they are generally fast. We'll check the historic conditions here momentarily, but they are generally fast Bermuda greens. So in the same time frame, since the beginning of 2021, your top putters on fast Bermuda greens have been Sam Burns, Ben Taylor, Chesson Hadley, Brendan Todd, Davis Riley, Ben Griffin, Matt Fitzpatrick, Denny McCarthy, Kevin Tway, and Alex Noren. So only one player has been in the top 10 in both total performance on long courses, difficult rounds, and now in putting, fast Bermuda putting specifically. That's been Matt Fitzpatrick. Of course, with fast and Bermuda greens, it's Bermuda Burns. Of course, Denny McCarthy, a world-class putter. Chesson Hadley much prefers Bermuda. Brendan Todd, just a generally very good putter. And if we get the information that the Poa Trivialis is dominant, that's when we'll take a look at Innisbrook, at TPC Scottsdale, TPC San Antonio, those 5 courses that we seemingly used every week past couple of months or so. But there's a look at a couple of important metrics and whatnot to begin your week in terms of research, especially in terms of putting, and then difficult rounds and on long courses. Before we go to the historic conditions, I'm going to narrow in the timeline. We'll bring it to the beginning of 2023. Again, just from the course breakdown in Fantasy National, we saw that ball striking was going to be very, very important. So let's take a look at those 2 metrics. Now, you can absolutely look at ball striking alone or as its own category, which ball striking is a combination of strokes gained off the tee and strokes gained approach. I prefer to look at them separately. It's just my preference. If you want a nice, clean summary, you can look at ball striking, but we're going to be looking at off the tee and approach separately. So, since the start of this calendar year, beginning of 2023, your top off the tee players have been Patrick Cantley, Hayden Buckley, Luke List, Keith Mitchell, Gary Woodland, Cam Young, Victor Hovland, Terrell Hatton, Cameron Davis, Corey Connors, Brian Harmon, and Sung Jae. Do note that the Mexico Open is not in here yet. That info, that data will be loaded tomorrow and will be ready for the Data Dive show tomorrow night. But just do note that the Mexico Open is not in yet. So there's your top off the tee players. Your top strokes gained approach players. Tony Finau, which probably won't change considering he is your winner down in Vedanta. Tony Finau, Xander Schauffele, Colin Morikawa, Ricky Fowler, Wyndham Clark, Max Homa, Jordan Spieth, Victor Hovland, Ben Martin, and Rory McIlroy. Don't want to do too much in terms of looking at statistics tonight. We usually save that for the Data Dive show. Shown you, total performance when it's difficult, long courses, Bermuda putting, specifically fast Bermuda putting, off the tee and approach. I will show, because they are going to be extremely important, just like they were at Vedanta last week. Let's take a look at total par 5 performance, just to get a feel for some players we might want to focus on early on in our research this week for wagers, or perhaps some names to put an asterisk next to when prices come out for DFS contests. So, your top par 5 performers this calendar year: Patrick Cantley, Sung Jae, Wyndham Clark, Tommy Fleetwood, Jordan Spieth, Xander Schauffele, Tony Finau, Colin Morikawa, Justin Thomas, and Matt Kuchar. So give these guys, a pretty heavy consideration early on. Maybe if you like the number tomorrow when the odds come out at the various books, take a long look at those players, as par 5s are extremely important here at Quail Hollow. But now let's go ahead and take a look at the historic conditions at Quail Hollow. And I'm going to do my best here to try not and confuse you, as, again, I've stated it a couple of times, but don't put a whole lot of emphasis into last year's Wells Fargo. Quail Hollow is being prepared for the President's Cup, so the Wells Fargo moved to TPC Potomac, and it is not a very good comparison course for Quail Hollow. The greens are bent at TPC Potomac. Now they are fast, but it was a par 70. It was short. It was just not. It's not a very good comparison for Quail Hollow, except for maybe the difficulty. However, 2021, 2019, and 2018 were all played at Quail Hollow. So we're looking at these 12 rows here, these 3 years of data. You see, in those 12 rounds, you only had only two that were measured to average in terms of scoring. All of the others were difficult. They've all been labeled as Bermuda. That's why I'm going to be using Bermuda unless otherwise noted, or if I find information for you all to pass along that the Poa Trivialis is dominant. But I'm thinking the Bermuda is dominant at this time of year. So we're going to be looking at Bermuda. I don't do much with green firmness, but they're generally pretty firm. Hitting fairways are always pretty difficult, although it was easy in the first round last year. But they're generally pretty difficult. Now, the rough is not terribly difficult to play out of. It is only average in length. So if the rough was long, this would just be an insane course to play. It's already difficult enough with its length and whatnot. So the rough is generally kept pretty short, or at least in terms of average, in its average in length. Green speeds have always been fast. It's always been a long course. And we can see some more of that in 2016 to 2014 as well. It's always been long, fast greens, although, the 1 year, it did play lightning in 2016, but generally speaking, it's just been fast greens. So there's a look at the tournament conditions for the Wells Fargo. Normally, we go to the tournament history tab, and we can look at it a little bit, but again, 2022 was played at TPC Potomac. 2017 was played at Eagle Point. These 2 years, Quail Hollow was being used for different events. President's Cup, and I believe 2017 was Quail Hollow was being used for a major. So instead of fumbling around with trying to figure out strokes gained total or whatnot, we'll take a look at some of this data in here, but then we'll look at Microsoft Excel more. So your technical defending champion is Max Homa, who won the Wells Fargo last year at TPC Potomac. However, the last time the Wells Fargo was played at Quail Hollow, your champion was Rory in 2021. Max Homa also has won at Quail Hollow. That was in 2019. 2018, your winner was Jason Day. So there are your 3 winners in the 3 years that I've gathered the statistics from Fantasy National. Rory in 2021, Max Homa in 2019, Jason Day in 2018. So we're not going to do too much in terms of this tab this week, as I don't want to have to go through and remove essentially 40% of this data. Instead, let's go ahead and move to Microsoft Excel, and I will bring up the comparison course first. So let me move down a row. Wells Fargo. Well, compared to the average full field course, you see that off the tee, is much more pronounced in terms of importance here. 25% more important than the average full field course. Approach, very important. Now, around the green is actually getting a lot of play as well. However, we didn't see that graphically in Fantasy National. That's going to be a little bit in terms of the difference because I'm gathering the top 30, whereas we only looked at the top 10s, 5s, and winners in Fantasy National. So we'll see if around the green is something we really want to look at, or we can perhaps be a little bit more specific, and that's what I'm thinking we're going to want to do in terms of scrambling, perhaps some sand saves, things of that nature. I don't know if around the green just in general is where we're going to go. I'm more thinking it's going to be scrambling and things of that nature. It is a little surprising to see that putting is slightly under full field course average when, at least for the winners, it's such an astronomical part of their success. So we'll see if perhaps we're going to want to add a little bit of emphasis in putting as opposed to what is being shown here for the top 30. Moving right along here, driving distance, again, it is a factor. You just have to have some distance here to succeed at Quail Hollow. You're not the Kevin Kisners, the Webb Simpsons, the Matt Kuchars. They generally tend to struggle here. You've got to have some length. You've got 8 par 4s that measure over 450 yards. You just got to have some length here. Fairways, they're pretty difficult to hit. So instead of looking at fairways, we could be looking at good drives. As you see here, it's 25% more important than the full field average course. Greens also extremely difficult to hit. Just getting a little bit skewed there. So almost 25% more important. And as I mentioned, sand saves, 89% more important here. So perhaps sand saves are something we want to look at this week. Moving into scoring metrics, again, Eagles, I just don't like thinking about Eagles here at Quail Hollow. I gather the information, I gather the data just to show it, but I do not feel strongly that Eagles is something we want to look at. It's pretty clear that the bogey avoidance, at least for the players that finish in the top 30, sets a clear precedent over the birdies gained, and that aligns at least with what I think naturally. If a course is difficult, par being a good score, if you're able to avoid bogeys, you're going to be rising up the leaderboard. So we're going to be looking at bogey avoidance pretty heavily this week, I think. Moving along to the specifics in par 3s, 4s, and 5s, we saw this graphically. The par 3s were pretty mitigated in importance. You see across all of these lengths, except for the longest of the long par 3s, that 246-yard par 3. And I don't know if I really want to do too much or put a lot of emphasis into that, because not every course has a 225 plus par 3. You see Jack's Place, Muirfield doesn't. Keene Trace, Barbasol doesn't. The St. Jude, TPC Southwind doesn't. So don't feel like I want to put a lot of emphasis into this. We might not be doing much with par 3s at all this week. At least early on early on a Sunday evening for this week, doesn't look like par 3s are going to have too much importance at all. Instead, we're looking at some par 4s, 13% more important. Again, this is quite a heavy number. Not every course has a 0 to 350, so I don't want to put too much emphasis. Although there are 2 par 4s that measure to here, don't think I want to exclude that range. Instead, you see 6 of the 11 par 4s at Quail Hollow measure from 450 to 5. This is a much more believable number, as most courses have at least 1 to 2 450 to 5 par 4s, and with such a huge amount, the majority of the par fours at Quail Hollow being in this range, you see 90%, 43%. We're going to be looking at long par fours in terms of metrics and who we want to focus on this week. Par fives, surprising to me that it says 10%. Now, this is for the top 30s, but it's surprising to see that par fives are pretty low here in terms of other full field courses. So, a little bit of a disagreement between, what I'm gathering for the top 30 versus what the top 10s, 5s, and winners are doing. So it'll be interesting as we move throughout the week, especially tomorrow on the Data Dive show as we look at prior leaderboards, what is going on here with these par 5s. Then lastly, I do want to look at a couple of things in proximity. Surprisingly, at least to me, because when we saw proximity for the course in general, it was severely further away. 36 feet is the average prox here at Quail Hollow versus 29 at the average tour event. Yet, proximity at other full field courses basically course average, but 200 plus is getting emphasized here a little bit, 12%. So, again, something very interesting that we'll want to look at tomorrow in the Data Dive show, and especially those prior leaderboards, if the 200 plus is indeed the range we want to focus on. So there's a look at Quail Hollow in a pretty data intensive way, especially compared against other full field courses. Let's go ahead and move over to what I call the early look file. This is that strokes gained total tab from Fantasy National, brought to Microsoft Excel and split across the various metrics, specifically at Quail Hollow from these players playing. So we see in the past 5 years, the most events that someone is going to be playing is 3. 2018, 2019, and 2021. Last year, the Wells Fargo was played at TPC Potomac. 2020 canceled because 2020 was the year that it was. You see Victor Hovland. He's only played at Quail Hollow once for the Wells Fargo Championship. He did finish 3rd. Matt Wallace finished 6th. But Rory is your pretty severe strokes gained total leader at Quail Hollow. Emiliano Grillo has been very good. Joel Damon and Keith Mitchell have been very good. So I'm going to filter out the players that have only played it once. I want to see, of the players who have played Quail Hollow at least 2 of the 3 years, what they have done well. So Rory, clearly the best average finish of the players who have played 2 or 3 times. Again, Joel Damon, Keith Mitchell, Webb Simpson, for as much as I mentioned that he was in the category where you needed to have a lot of length, he's hit his irons well here. He's been very good around the green, but you can see around the green has not really had a whole lot of emphasis for the players that have the elite finishes. He is by far the one that's leading in around the green, but Webb's just generally played well here. It's a little surprising to me, but he has. You can see just the heavy concentration of dark green, heavy green in ball striking. Emiliano Grillo's not been great off the tee here, but he has made up for it in approach. He's actually putt well here as well. Rory's been very, very good in the ball striking. He's putt well here. Joel Damon has been very good here. Let's see. Justin Thomas, 2 for 2 doing Justin Thomas things. Very good ball striking. He's not putt well here. Luke List doing Luke List things. Very, very, elite off the tee. Not putting well. Actually, not hitting his irons well. James Powers 3 for 3. Jason Day, a winner here at Quail Hollow. The lowest of the three, I would think. Although Max Homa is very far down here. There he is. So he missed the cut his last time, or his time before his win in 2019. Okay. Moving along. Oh, shucks. Driving distance, again, maybe not absolutely mandatory, but by gosh, it's close. Rory, Mitchell, even Nick Watney, long off the tee here specifically at Quail Hollow. Luke List always long. Justin Thomas has length. Jason Day's been long here. Patrick Rodgers has been long here. Xander. Very, very difficult to succeed without a modicum of distance. Grillo and Damon fairly close to field average in terms of distance. They're slightly under. Webb Simpson's never going to be long. Duffner's certainly not long, at least in the twilight of his career. Brian Harmon's never going to be long. So maybe not as mandatory as I thought it was, in all fairness. But it's certainly something that I'm going to emphasize this week. Again, the Jason Days, the Luke Lists, Nick Watney's, Keith Mitchell's, Rory's, and greens and regulation, which you can see here as well. Very, very high concentration of green in greens and regulation. And good drives gained as well, although it's not as strong of an emphasis. So I'll be interested to see tomorrow as well. Good drives gained, greens, all that kind of stuff as we move through the prior leaderboards. Moving into scoring metrics, this will tell you everything basically that you need to know in terms of scoring metrics here and what you want to focus on. Rory, bogey avoidance, bogey avoidance, bogey avoidance. Keith Mitchell, slightly higher in the birdies gained. Watney, bogey avoidance. Webb, bogey avoidance. Even, bogey avoidance, bogey avoidance, bogey avoidance, bogey avoidance. So anybody, or all but one player who has played multiple years at Quail Hollow in the past 5 years has been favored in the bogey avoidance. They've been more adept at avoiding bogeys at Quail Hollow than they are at birdies gained. So we're going to be putting a lot of emphasis into bogey avoidance this week. Par threes. Let's gather anybody who's averaged a top 40. So this is 13 players, not a whole lot, but this is an average of a 1.5. The par 4s, a 3.9. So 2.5 times the importance of the par 3s. And surprisingly, the par 5s really not all that important. It's only a 0.9. It's surprising to see considering the graphs in Fantasy National for the top 10s and the top 5s and the winners, such a heavy emphasis on the par 5s. But for your top 30s, perhaps not as much. So we're going to have quite a bit of emphasis in the par 4s, I think, this week. And you know, it's getting cut off. I was going to say you can see, but you can't. Now you can. The heavy green in the 450 to 5 as well for your elite performers at Quail Hollow. And then lastly, bring in a look at proximities. Now, total procs having quite a bit of success here for your elite finishers. 200 plus, a little bit more mixed. Luke List has been atrocious at 200 plus, specifically here at Quail Hollow. But Webb Simpson has been very, very good. So that would explain a lot of his success and why he's not long off the tee, but he's had success here at Quail Hollow. He's been probably the best of the players in the field at 200 plus procs. Nick Watney's been very good. Justin Thomas has been very good at 200 plus procs. Surprisingly, Rory has not been all that great at 200 plus procs. He's been below average. He's just been very good at most of the other proximities. But total procs is something here, at least for your elite finishers, it looks like, who have played it multiple years. 200 plus, probably not as strong as I thought it was going to be, but you do have some pretty big numbers here. 220, 109, 153, a little bit lower, but Harmon 117. So if a guy is not long, if he doesn't have a lot of driving distance, he better have some 200 plus proximity success, or what's the word I'm looking for? Capability, if that player wants to compete here at Quail Hollow. All right, that's going to do it for the Data Dive show. I'll bring back every player in the field, remove that filter for you all so you can see the players that are in the field, their specific performance here at Quail Hollow. Just as a quick refresher, all the players in the field, the number of times they have played at Quail Hollow in the past 5 years, their average finish, how many missed cuts they have, and their average per tournament in whatever statistic. That's going to do it for the Data Dive show tonight. Thank you, Bruce, for jumping in chat and helping me remember the third player that has decided to skip this event. So again, if you have not been here for the rest of the show, 3 players who have decided to skip this event so far: Hideki, excuse me, Hideki Matsuyama, Scotty Scheffler, and John Rahm have decided to skip this event this week, so they are not here in Charlotte. Everyone else that I know of, I have not seen any withdrawals so far. Everyone else is here. But thank you, Bruce, for jumping in chat. Really appreciate it. And thanks to everyone else out there who tunes in, watches, supports the channel by liking the videos, commenting, subscribing. It's always appreciated. Reminder that baseball content will start back up tomorrow over on Twitter, my 3 Up 3 Down. So if you are interested in baseball content, give me a follow over at Twitter and be on the lookout for 3 Up 3 Down resuming tomorrow. And let me know how your Mexico Open went, either on social media or in the comments. I hope that you shared in the success that I did. DFS was a slightly losing proposition, but much made up for in terms of the 2 top 20s that I hit. So hopefully you shared in that success with me last week at Vedanta, and as we move forward into this week at Quail Hollow. So for all of the wagers you made last week for the Mexico Open, for all of the DFS contests you played last week at the Mexico Open, and until I see you tomorrow night for the Data Dive show, may all your bets be profitable.